think Julia's got the first couple questions lined up. Do you want to take it away, Julia?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm curious how many people are in your bargaining unit in GEO and what kinds of workers are represented. Like, is it all grad workers or all kinds of academic workers under the same contract, or yeah, how is that organized exactly?
Yeah, so our union represents graduate student instructors and graduate student staff assistants at the University of Michigan, which together are around 2,400 workers, the instructors being the vast majority of them. And of that, a little over 60% are GEO members. So because of the Janus Supreme Court ruling, even though right to work has been repealed in the state of Michigan, because we're public sector workers, we're still in an open shop.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, so another thing that we wanted to talk more about is kind of the contract that you're fighting for, and having, clear, strong demands is like really important for a contract fight, and like something for members to actually like concretely get behind. So can you explain a little bit like what the main demands for your strike are, and how you kind of like built that support with the workers around these demands?
Yeah, so in our last contract campaign, which was 2019-2020, we had a really ambitious platform that had a ton of different demands in different areas. But what we heard from members was that the different demands didn't really cohere into a single narrative that made it easy for them to communicate what the campaign was about. So this year, or I guess actually last year, we tried to take the platform development process in a different direction. So we started off by having a conversation with members where we sort of collectively voted on what the main narrative of our campaign was going to be. So members decided to focus the campaign around affordability. Now, of course, even though we decided to have affordability as our narrative, that didn't mean we were going to shove aside or forget about the other social justice issues that are important to our union. So affordability, that means that our sort of flagship demand is this living wage of $38,000 a year, which is a really big raise for us. But we also see how affordability issues are reflected in other ways that people are marginalized. So we can see that for like international students, for parents, for disabled workers, all these groups have higher costs associated with their identities. So we're able to help them through this affordability narrative by having demands for additional support for them, like a better childcare subsidy, an emergency fund for international workers, lower copays on chronic conditions for disabled workers. And throughout the platform development, we had conversations with over 1,000 workers. We then formed working groups around specific issues where hundreds of workers came together to formulate the demands. And then we articulated it into a platform around the issue of affordability. And though I'll add that three other important issues that I haven't mentioned that we're also fighting for are expanded harassment protections, which is a huge issue at the University of Michigan, asking the university to fund an unarmed police alternative on campus, and expanding access to gender-affirming care.
If I could add to, I think part of your question was about how like support has been gained from just like the working members of the union. And I can speak to that as somebody who, I've always been aware of the union and for the last 4 years that I've been here, but I have not been nearly as involved until a couple of months ago, because all of the demands that we're bargaining for currently have been very clearly laid out to members. And affordability is something that is in everybody's best interest to be able to afford to live where they work. And it seems like something that's obvious to me that I should make enough money to live here if I'm required to work here. And so I was really interested in like, why is this being like, why are they fighting so hard back? And so I started going to the bargaining sessions and seeing the way that these negotiations are going. And with that experience, it has forced me to become significantly more involved, because if you go to the bargaining sessions, you see the way that these negotiations are happening, the way that like we are asking quite directly to be treated like people who deserve to live here, and being denied that to our faces. I think that has been a really, really powerful way for just regular like working members of the union to become super involved over the course of the strike.
And if I can speak just a little bit more to that, we are using this open bargaining strategy where bargaining sessions are open to any member to come watch. And this was a big fight against the university to get that. We had to spend 2 or 3 months just focused on the issue of whether our members could come to their own bargaining sessions and watch the negotiations and really participate in them too, because if we're deciding what to do at the table, we have the discussion with all the members in the audience. But yeah, as Katie was saying, I think it's really paid off, this strategy. So for example, when management gave us one of their below inflation salary offers, they actually told us that they didn't even take into account cost of living when coming up with these ridiculous numbers. So you can imagine the kind of effect that has on the members who were there watching it. And we've had over 1,000 members attend at least one bargaining session over the course of the campaign, which has been incredibly impressive. And the result is that members really want to hold the line on these issues because they know the university has no evidence to back up their positions.
I'll just quickly add, it's one thing to hear somebody like Amir or like anyone in union leadership, for example, say, this is what we're fighting for, here's why we're fighting for it. It's another thing to be in the room and hear them say directly to Amir, to others in the leadership team, you don't deserve this. It makes you take it a lot more seriously, and that's been really powerful for members.
Yeah, that's really exciting that you won open bargaining, and it's like can be a super radicalizing experience for members to see that like below inflation offer from the university, like directly paired up against like the 38K that you guys are fighting for. And yes, that's something that's a huge part of the UAW contract campaign as well, is this issue of affordability where, rents in Seattle are some of the highest in the country, and like for grad student employees or ASEs at UW, like 82% of them are rent burdened. And so, yeah, we're fighting for 30% raises for research scientists and 72K starting salary for postdocs, because we know that's what's needed to afford living in Seattle. And yeah, pairing that up against, the like 3% that UW is offering is just nowhere near enough. So being like really clear about what's at stake and like what they think that we're worth. And yeah, you mentioned kind of how their offer doesn't match up with inflation. Is something like a cost of living adjustment or like a COLA baked into your contract? So you have yearly raises that are tied to the inflation rate, and then a raise on top of that. So you actually get a real raise each year. Is that something that was discussed at all?
Yeah, so we're on a 3-year contract, and the way we've structured our proposal is that we have a really big raise in the first year to get us up to the local cost of living, and then subsequent raises tied to inflation. So I think we really learned a lot from the campaign in UCSC around COLA. And yeah, that's something we believe very strongly, that our wages need to reflect how much it costs to live here, and we should be able to afford to live in the place where we work. Ann Arbor's seen cost of living skyrocket. In the past 3 years, the gap between our salary and the cost of living has tripled, and that's why we're asking for such a large and historic raise.
Awesome. Yeah, I wanted to come in about something we see in many contracts across the country is, including yours, this insidious no strike clause, which is of course meant to undercut the power of the union to use its most important tool of the strike. So how did your union decide to go on strike even with this sort of imposing no strike clause? And how have you responded to the university declaring your strike illegal?
Yeah, so we went on strike in violation of the no strike clause. And in fact, in the state of Michigan, public sector workers do not have the right to strike. So we also went on strike in violation of the public sector strike ban in state law. And to be honest, it was that second thing that was scarier for us than the no strike clause. Speaking to the no strike clause first, then I'll get to the ban. Basically, the university knows where our power lies, and they know the power kind of ends when the term ends and the students go home. So our contract is set to expire right at the end of the term. So if we had waited for the contract to expire for the students to go home, we would have had very little power. So I think for us, it was like, are we going to be able to mount an effective strike, or is that not a tool that we're going to be able to use? And it was pretty clear we had no other option but to violate the no strike clause. In terms of the public sector strike ban, that was another thing. We went on strike in 2020, both within the contract, so outside of the campaign, and in violation of the ban, because the university had really bungled their response to COVID and were totally unprepared to bring students back, even though that's what they were doing. And I think that strike was a success for a lot of reasons, but we ended it earlier than we wanted to because we were on the verge of being enjoined by the university. They filed for an injunction against us. So one of the things we had to do was really prepare to withstand an injunction. But to be honest, we were just, in 2020, we were getting people were kind of panicked. The situation was chaotic. It was, peak of the pandemic. And we were frankly getting some not great advice from our parent union. But this time we took the injunction to the hearing and we actually beat them in court. Even though we were in violation, clearly in violation of the of the ban on public sector strikes, the judge found that injunctive relief was not warranted and they weren't able to force us back on the job.
Katie, did you want to come in on that at all, or feel like that was a powerful answer? So
yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much sums it up. I would also say that we, I mean, from my perspective as somebody just attending the general membership meetings, this was all very clearly laid out, exactly which laws we were breaking in which ways by entering and going through with the strike. And, there was still, what was it, like 96% in favor of going on strike because of how severe the situation is. It was also very clear that we were much more prepared this time to defeat an injunction than we were in 2020 because we understood a lot more about how that works. The union was really well communicated with, and I think for the most part everybody really understood what we're up against, and I think that made us a lot stronger this year.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think something we've seen with academic worker struggles that can suffer is that a lot of the grad students are sort of on a 4-year timeline, and so the lessons from the previous context struggle don't always make it into the next one. So I'm really liking this sort of additive lessons that you guys are talking about, and especially not sort of depending on the courts to be on your side, but preparing for that and fighting. You also kind of mentioned bad advice from your parent union. I was digging around your guys' website, and at first I was like, is GEO an independent union? And then I saw in your history that it seems like you're affiliated with AFT, if that's still correct. And I'm wondering, it seems the sort of militant approach you guys are taking has more of an independent flavor to it. What is the relationship between GEO and AFT in terms of what kind of control AFT has over the tactics you guys are taking versus just kind of them offering their sort of labor lawyers to give advice?
Yeah, so I mean, you can understand I'm a little bit hesitant to air dirty laundry too much. I think AFT, to its credit, has given leadership quite a bit of latitude in how we've been leading this strike. And I think that, even the open bargaining campaign is not something that is the norm for AFT. So they really have been willing to let us do that, which has been good. Now, there have been some other places where I think they've come up short to a certain extent. That advice they give us is often geared towards what would be a normal AFT campaign and hasn't been as helpful for the kind of campaign that we've been running. Additionally, unlike the UAW, AFT does not have a strike fund. And that's been pretty difficult for us because we workers on strike lost our April paychecks. And we basically had to fundraise ourselves to be able to have a hardship fund to support workers who, in a lot of cases, are living paycheck to paycheck and would really struggle with missing even a single paycheck. So it's been mixed, I would say. I think, AFT's legal counsel beat the universities in court on this injunction issue, which was really good. There have been other areas where I think they've left a bit to be desired.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think we have to sort of walk this line, right? Where like the union movement is stronger when it's united, but it's also stronger with fighting tactics. And I think there's like sort of looking at the past period where the labor movement has been in decline, and that sort of a friendly relationship with the employer has been like the norm of like how we win, isn't working. And so, yeah, it's really inspiring to see the tactics that you guys are taking. And yeah, I think that this kind of shakeup is happening all over the labor movement. We see new leadership elected in the Teamsters, this Democratic slate elected in UAW. And so I think the sort of bottom up strategy is shaking up unions all across the country. And I noticed, on your guys' website, you have this sort of quote. It says, GEO's organizing efforts then centered on moving GEO from a service model union in which members saw the union as something that works for them when they have problems and in which they play no great part, to an organizing model in which the membership plays a consistently active role in determining the union's direction and priorities. And I wonder, yeah, just like for yourself, but also for the broader labor movement, which is facing the same dynamics, what specific changes do you think we need to fight for in our unions to make them into fighting organizations? Like if you had like a top 3 changes to make to like your union to make sure like it's armed for a fight.
Yeah, so I would say this open bargaining strategy that I already mentioned is definitely a big one. And one thing that I would say is that, we've actually had open bargaining for well over a decade in GEO. But in past campaigns, when we've had it, it's been kind of like, yeah, if you want to come, you can come. We're not doing a big push. We're not going to book big rooms that can hold 100 people. We'll have a room that can fit 30 people, and some people will sit in the back and watch. But that's not really what this is about. This is about creating a mass movement. So if we're having open bargaining, we need to really commit to it and actually drive workers there in vast numbers. And that's what the fight was with the university. Is open bargaining going to be for the same 15 people to come watch, or is it really going to be hundreds and hundreds of workers are going to come watch bargaining? So that's what I would say. And then beyond that, trying to treat everything as being about organizing. So not just having like a platform development survey that people fill out a Google form, but having conversations that drive what your union is going to be demanding, and taking opportunities to organize people and have everybody feel ownership over the campaign. So it's not just something that's coming from leadership, but that's coming from membership and people feel committed to. And like, as a bargaining team, the strongest position you can be in is to be able to truthfully tell management, like, I can take this crappy offer back to membership, but they are just not going to buy it. It's not us you need to convince, it's them. And if you're not offering something that's going to pay their rent, that's going to make them afford childcare, that's going to get them the gender affirming care that they need to survive, you're not going to be able to get them back in the classrooms. And I think that that's something we've been able to do this campaign, which has been really powerful.
I would add too, we've spoken a lot about open bargaining. I definitely can't overstate how important that has been in my and my peers, like just understanding of the issue and radicalization towards this fight. The other major thing is it really does feel like this contract campaign specifically, individual voices are not only heard but like amplified in a way that is really like, I don't know, just empowering. This is a specific, what's the word? The kind of framing of this campaign has been around affordability, around this living wage as a central issue. And a lot of the ways, the bargaining team is becoming creative about how they're packaging that, how they're kind of saying, what if we tried this? What if we tried this? Ultimately getting us to the living wage, but in a couple of different and creative ways. And many of those have just been suggestions from just like one person who showed up that day and had an idea. And those ideas from individuals are making their way all the way to the top, to the contract, to the language that is used at the bargaining table. And that feels very much as if, every single one of us is playing a very important role, and can play a very important role in exactly what our contract is going to ultimately be.
Yeah, you mentioned, I think it's really important what you guys have said about not just passive open bargaining, but this like active approach. I also noticed on your website you have all of these strike bulletins, which seems kind of like the companion to open bargaining of like, well, if you couldn't be there, here's kind of everything that happened, which I think is like, yeah, sort of builds on that. I wonder if you could describe a little bit like, how do you use those? Are they just on your website? Do you send them out regularly? Do you have discussions, or there's a PDF version? So I don't know if that means there's just like piles of them in all the buildings.
Yeah, totally. So the negotiation bulletins are actually something that I've been working on primarily, I think, since probably December or whenever we started with them. We had them from the first day of bargaining. And when we were bargaining once a week, we kind of had them come out once a week. And so bargaining would happen on Friday. We would write it kind of Friday evening over the weekend. And then Monday mornings, we would have a door knocking session around handing out the bulletins. So we would have a group of maybe 10 organizers meet in a central place on campus and then go to different departments and hand them out, either slipping them under people's doors or, better yet, having a conversation with somebody where that's kind of the way in. So I think that's been really useful. And we've continued to do this during the strike. I think they've become a little bit less important during the strike because people are a little bit more present and talking to each other, and there are other ways to build community and communicate. But they were extremely helpful during the first part of the campaign leading up to the strike. And I think do a good job of providing like a narrative of what's happened, and also allowing workers to hear from each other, because we always like to feature quotes from rank and file members in there, kind of explaining how they felt at bargaining, how they've been feeling on the picket lines, and highlighting different events that have happened.
Yeah, so those door knocking sessions were my direct way into the campaign this year. They literally a couple of organizing team members knocked on the door for my office hours and wanted to talk about it. And then they continued to do so every week during my office hours. And it was really helpful because I had, this one person who's coming every time pretty predictably and who I kind of build a relationship with. And I understand that like, we can talk about this. You're a person who knows what's going on. I'm a person who wants to. And that was really, really helpful. Amir, you said that they're becoming less important. I think, on the global scale, I see your point, but I will say that as a graduate workers union, a lot of our a decent portion of our power comes from support from faculty at the university and from undergrads, people who can't and won't be members of our bargaining unit but are really impacted by the work that we do. I've been taking the negotiation bulletins printed on like neon colored paper and putting them on all of the bulletin boards in my building. I don't know if anyone else is doing that, but I have every week just been posting them on bulletin boards and starting discussions. So I work in a building that is primarily filled with faculty, so who are not directly really, hearing the communications directly from Geo unless they really want to be. But like literally the number of times that I've been putting up the bulletin with the thumbtack and somebody has stopped me to ask about it, I would say that has been really powerful. So I think it's still, it's still working.
Yeah, one of the things I've been watching like on social media is like these appeals to like faculty and like support from faculty and students, and like during undergrad commencement, like all of the support that was coming out for the GEO workers. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit more about like how that fits into like maybe an escalation plan, because like with every successful strike, where real gains are won and the balance of power is able to like shift between workers and the bosses, it's important to like have a plan to escalate in order to like actually win. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about like how student support and faculty support and stuff like shutting down pickets at construction sites, or picketing at construction sites, was like part of the escalation plan, or kind of, what that looks like.
Yeah, sure. So this is something we've been working on all year. The chair of our Solidarity committee, Kathleen, has been leading basically like a GEO allies meeting every few weeks with folks attending from the lecturers union, some supportive tenure track faculty, undergrads largely organized in YDSA, who are like really the core undergrad activist group on campus, and then have been in contact with comrades in the building trades and in other local unions. And it has been really powerful to have that support. I think, it's certainly important. I think our theory of our power is really with our withholding our labor is central. So, as we're in this current phase of the strike where the leverage we're trying to put on the university is through withholding grades, it's been great to see, for example, the entire history department faculty announce that they're going to be withholding grades in support of us. But we think that the power of like nearly 1,000 graduate student instructors is really the main thing that we're depending on. So it's important, but it's not necessarily the only important thing, or even the most important.
I just want to touch quickly on the support from undergraduates as well. I think since the union is heavily comprised of graduate student instructors, that means that the majority of us are teaching undergraduates in the classroom multiple times a week. And having the undergrad solidarity has also been, really impactful and really important. Early on in the strike, there was this, threat from the university of if you are not working, we will withhold your pay. The way that the university planned to tackle that was by asking us if we were working, through sending us a form that we were supposed to say yes, no. And so we could easily ignore that form, but then they could very quickly just go to our students and be like, did you have class this week? And so being able to communicate with undergraduates and say, like, this is the tactic that the university is doing, choose to respond to this how you would like, but the reason they're asking you this is because they want to know whether to dock my pay for this week. It's been really helpful in making sure that, these questions aren't very widely responded to. And I think the low response rate from both, from people all over campus, regardless of their affiliation with the union or not, was a huge point at the table when in the court over the injunction hearing, because it was like, we just have no idea how many workers are withholding their labor or not. And the solidarity from other people on campus was central to that.
Cool. Yeah, that's really exciting to hear, getting actively soliciting the support of undergrads, and not just kind of standing out on a picket line and letting people pass by your picket line, but actually explaining clearly what the strategy is, and how your fight is connected with their living and learning conditions and stuff like that. I'm going to circle back to the question about construction sites, because I think that's a really cool tactic, and something that is important to build that cross union solidarity. So how has that been going? What impact has it had so far?
Yeah, so this is a tactic that GEO has often used in the past, where basically we picket outside at one of the university's, relentless construction sites that they always seem to have going in one place or another. And we're able to get the site completely shut down for the day. So to be able to do this successfully, we initially built relations with the leaders of the unions of the site. And then the day before we held the picket, we went and flyered the site. So just to talk to the workers a little bit, explain our issues to them, and give them a warning that we would be picketing tomorrow. This has a couple benefits. One, I think, for the workers on the site, who are, I think a lot of people are feeling the same issues that we're feeling, where Workers are facing a cost of living squeeze. We're bearing the brunt of inflation. And those at the top are still getting huge salaries, still getting huge bonuses. The university is still having a budget surplus of $400 million a year. And workers are expected to get by with less. So when we did that, it was very positively received, and they agreed, the locals agreed not to cross our lines. And going there the day before was, of course, important because some workers are driving like an hour to get to their site. So now they know, like, okay, I'm just not going to come in at all tomorrow and don't have to waste 2 hours on the road. And it's worth noting that when these workers don't cross our lines, they lose a day of pay because they're not working. So it's really quite a strong show of solidarity for them not to do that. And we have been successful in shutting down multiple university construction sites for multiple days each.
Nice. Yeah, that's, I think, really exciting. I think there was some organic development around that during the 2018 UAW 4121 strike, where there was like a on-site picket, but I don't think it was as well organized as what you're describing. So I really think that that's like a good template that you've laid out in terms of like, yeah, that other workers can apply that. Yeah, so I think it would be a bad interview of workers on strike if we didn't ask, there's already been, you talked about the solidarity from the undergrads not filling out this survey, or, the faculty who are standing with you and not grading. But in terms of like ordinary people, what can they do to support your strike? It seems like you are getting some support. That's how we heard about this. Worker Strike Back was able to donate to your strike fund. But, what's your sort of call to action for people who don't work at the University of Michigan, but, want to support what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so I would say the number one thing, as you mentioned, is donating to our strike fund. We're in a tough position where our parent union doesn't have a strike fund. They only offer to like pay the interest on loans that workers can get from a bank, which is like really, really tough. So you can donate to our strike fund by going to givebutter.com. That's butter with a U /GEO strike fund. We've really seen a tremendous outpouring of support there. We've raised, I think, around $350,000, which has been really, really incredible to see, and has allowed us to support our workers as we've missed this April paycheck. So that's been good. And of course, I'll also add that if anybody's like in a union or part of a broader organization, we're always happy to receive like a solidarity statement. We've had, statements from the, international UAW, which has been really powerful. We got a statement last week from Canadian public sector union that represents a lot of grad workers in Canada and Ontario, and from all sorts of different politicians and other organizations. Has been really good.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned union resolutions. I think this is sort of another like fighting tradition of the labor movement that Worker Strike Back is trying to like rehabilitate and bring into like living memory. We've got a couple passed in locals across the country supporting the Amazon workers in Kentucky who are trying to unionize at KCVG. But then also over the whole past month, we've been organizing resolutions and unions around the right to strike. So you guys have been pretty busy. So I don't know if you've seen, but the same Supreme Court that cut down abortion access last summer is considering a case called Glacier Northwest versus the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. And that ruling could mean that businesses can sue unions for their lost profits during strikes. So just, you guys being on strike, you can see how on top of trying to pay your bills, like anything that the university lost, the union could be liable for. It's a clear recipe for just bankrupting unions and gutting the labor movement. So actually starting May 6th, so next Saturday through the 13th, Worker Strike Back is holding a week of action to defend the right to strike with rallies and community tables and union resolutions. And I was wondering, even if it's you guys are already going to be on the picket lines, just a solidarity statement in terms of like calling for the right to strike, because I think your struggle shows, right, like why this tool is so important. So just kind of wanted to put that question forward, if that'd be something you guys would be interested in, sort of adding your voice to the thousands of workers who are calling to defend the right to strike.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something we'd support. We're facing a pretty difficult legal situation here in Michigan, where workers really don't have the right to strike and can already be sued by our employer for damages because of the strike. So that's like our lived reality already, and it's brutal. So I think, yeah, it's incredibly important to have this fight, and to really push for what I think is a human right and a basic tenet of democracy, the right to strike. So yeah, we strongly support this.
Yeah, just kind of thinking about like the broader labor movement, right? And how there's been a wave of like academic worker strikes and struggles across the country in like recent months and years, from like the University of California, which you mentioned, and like Rutgers, just to name a few. And so, yeah, I wanted to kind of discuss like how you see those strikes in relation to yours, any key lessons that you drew. You mentioned like the UC strike a few years ago that you took important lessons from. So yeah, what kinds of things, like for just some things that come to mind for me are how the university tries to like divide up workers as much as possible, which I think you kind of mentioned in Michigan, is kind of like not all workers are able to be a part of the union right now. So yeah, needed me to stay united to kind of increase your power and win even more. Or like there's been like a common trend sometimes of calling off a strike before workers have had a chance to democratically discuss the TA that you are able to get, which happened at a few universities, and yeah, stuff like that. Like what do you think are the most important lessons to draw?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've been following the other grad strikes pretty closely, and also have been thinking about these issues in the context of GEO's own recent history. So yeah, there's 2 points I guess I would make. So the first is thinking about where our power comes from. So for the past several decades of GEO's contracts, we've either settled the contract without going on strike with only the threat of a walkout, or we've settled it with a 1 to 3 day walkout. Our approach is completely different now. For us, it's hard for me to even imagine what kind of pressure is seriously brought to bear by a 1 to 2 or 3 day walkout. For most students, you're barely even missing one class if workers are on strike for 1 day. Most classes don't happen on any one given day of the week. So you have to be going out for an entire week if you're even going to get all classes canceled. Our theory of power is that, we're not like workers at a port or workers at a construction site, where if you picket the site at like the time of the concrete pour, they're going to be sitting there with this, concrete truck, and it's like do or die for the foreman, right? They need to get that concrete poured or else their whole site is messed up. That's not what it is at the university. The university can miss us for a day, for 2 days, for 3 days, for a week. It takes a while for our absence to accumulate and really cause damage and put pressure on the university. So I think we've been gearing up for a long haul strike of several weeks. And this is what we saw at the University of California, at Columbia, at Temple, not at Rutgers, but they're in a different situation than us, where they have a wall-to-wall union. So that's the first thing I would say, gearing up for a long haul strike and really waiting to accumulate pressure and leverage. The second thing that you alluded to, I completely agree with, that paying attention to the disconnect between the bargaining team and the membership. And I think that's really a strength of open bargaining, as I mentioned before, right? So having members in the room discussing counters from HR as they come in really disempowers the bargaining team to sell out the membership. So we're not in a position where the bargaining team can suddenly decide like, okay, we've agreed to this without talking to members. No, the members are there. They're seeing this. And when we have to discuss the counter, members are participating and deciding for themselves, deciding for ourselves. So I think that's been really strong for us and has prevented us from getting in a situation where the bargaining team is carrying water for management.
I would say too that like something that has been really influential for us about these other like graduate labor and other academic union strikes is that like Amir said, we were on strike in 2020 as well for a much shorter period of time. And the way that the University of Michigan is responding to us this time is vastly different than the way that they were responding to us that time, but is very similar to the ways that other universities have been responding to their grad labor strikes, to where many of their like fear-mongering tactics and their like just union busting tactics we knew very well to expect. And that's because we had heard directly from the other grad unions that have been on strike recently that like, listen, here's what they're going to do first, here's what they're going to do next. And that plan, I think for the most part, like we were able to predict every one of their next moves, even though we hadn't experienced them ourselves, because we knew that other grad employees unions had.
I do have a follow-up question in terms of like, yeah, so as you're saying, like every industry, it's going to look a little different, like what your point of leverage is. But so, and yeah, I think with the UC strikes, the like question of withholding grades and the end of the semester was a huge part of kind of that struggle. And you guys already have identified that, like, you know, even the timing of your strike before your contract had ended was very consciously around the timing, and that withholding grades is a huge part of, you know, the impact you can have on the university. And we haven't even gotten into like proxy grading or anything like that, which they're trying to use to cut across typical boss tactics. But now that like graduation has happened, and that there has been some submission of grades, like what do you kind of see as like the next flashpoint in your strike now that you kind of, it's been a month, you've got, you know, the strike fund, like yeah, kind of what's the sort of next thing you guys are pointing towards?
So I would say that's not quite clear yet. We're having continued discussions among members about what to do. I think that the grading crisis hasn't really come to a head yet. Grades aren't formally due until May 2nd. And we've already seen, and a lot of these departments that have declared that they're going to support us in withholding grade, and indeed, there are many cases where graduate students are the sole instructor, so they're not teaching a section in a bigger lecture, but they're just the instructor. It's going to be difficult for the university for their, you know, administrative apparatus to really continue keeping the gears turning without these grades. So we're going to see what happens in the next 2 weeks based on that. How much of a crisis are we actually able to create for the university? And we're hoping that, you know, the boss will come to their senses and give us a fair contract. But I think if not, we're going to have to decide what to do. And, you know, it's possible we're going to have to levy another strike threat in the fall.
Kind of thinking about like my union took a strike authorization vote, and we're considering going on strike soon to win our own strong contract. So I'm curious what advice you might have based on your experiences in your strike for other academic workers that are fighting for contracts that keep up with the cost of living. And yeah, what advice would you give?
So I definitely recommend open bargaining to the extent that it's possible for you. That has been really, really good for us in expanding the number of members who are deeply invested in the campaign. And then I would say also think critically about where your leverage is. Think about how missed hours of course instruction affect the university's accreditation. Think about when their internal deadlines is and how you can create problems for the administrative bureaucracy, things that are much harder for them to ignore. Another thing we've been talking about is not expecting concessions to be linear when we're on strike. So sometimes we think like, okay, we're going to be on strike, and for every day we're on strike, we're going to get a little bit more every day, right? Like slowly build up till we get to where we want. What our theory this time is that actually we're going to get very, very little until the situation is intolerable for the boss, and then we're going to get a lot all at once. So that's kind of why we've been holding out. And we've seen over the course of the strike, that almost every week, we have a weekly vote at a membership meeting to extend the strike. It's incredibly uncontroversial because we simply haven't gotten what we need yet. So there's no reason to call it off. And that's why week after week, we get huge majorities. Like I'm talking about over 99% of people in a 300-400 person meeting. So that's been really incredible to see.
I mean, this might sound like kind of cliche, but I think it's like real from the perspective of just like a rank and file member of the union, is like to remember what the fight is for and how reasonable and logical that is, because they continue to make us feel like it's not. They being the boss, being the university, but also being like whoever is responding to their messaging, when their messaging is like necessarily much stronger than ours, just because of the reach of, you know, a highly ranked public institution. They continue to go out of their way to make sure that, you know, we sound like our demands are unreasonable, to emphasize that the raise we're asking for is 60%, which is a really big number, instead of $38,000 a year, which is quite a small number. The ways that this framing is presented by different people always comes with an agenda. But like, you know, continuing to understand that like, we didn't come up with this from nowhere. We came up with this from, this is what we need to survive. You know, maybe in the future we can fight for even more than that. But like right now, we really truly are fighting for what it is that we need. And like that perspective just is really important to keep, I think, as people try to tear it down.
Super inspiring. So yeah, we'll definitely make sure to plug and link to your guys' strike fund. I think it's been inspiring what you guys have been able to raise so far, and definitely pay attention in the next 2 weeks, see if we can get some additional like pressure from external sources. Sort of a last bonus question that I kind of have thought of while I've been listening to you talk. You mentioned early on in terms of like support you've gotten on campus. You mentioned YDSA, which of course is the Young Democratic Socialists of America. I'm a member of DSA as well as Socialist Alternative, and I think, you know, we could have a whole another hour of conversation of the role of socialists in the labor movement, and, you know, building the power of the working class. But I wonder if either of you identify as socialists, and if that connects to you, to the like role that you're playing in this strike and in your union, and yeah, how you kind of see this strike and your work on campus as like part of that broader fight for, you know, a society in which, you know, we don't have to beg for scraps to be able to pay for rent, and in which like human need is prioritized over the size of a university's endowment.
Yes, absolutely. I identify as a socialist, and that's the same for the vast majority of our leadership team. And you know, I think it's always been the case that if you're a leader in your union, you identify at least as a social democrat. But in the past 3 years, especially since our strike in 2020, we've seen that the, you know, hard left, like not social democrat, but socialist people have started getting more involved in the union, who began to see it again as a place for radical organizing. And that's been really powerful. And I think a key part of our ability to have a militant campaign, to have a fighting union, has been to have socialists in leadership positions able to win. And, you know, in Washtenaw County, we have the Huron Valley DSA, which I think has been doing okay. But to be honest, I think a lot of people who would be drawn to that organization have just been getting involved in GEO. And one small example of this is that GEO has a housing caucus, which has been leading the charge for tenants' rights in Ann Arbor and more broadly in Washtenaw County. And, you know, the housing caucus is affiliated with our union, but it's been led by people who are not graduate workers, who are not union members, who just see this as the place to organize for, you know, for human rights and better living conditions for people here, for renters. So I think it's really critical that we have left-wing leadership in these positions who really understand what it means to organize and have workplace democracy in a serious way, and not just as something that we talk to.
Yeah, I could not have said that better myself. I don't think I have anything to add. I think I agree completely.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exciting to hear. I think definitely like, just like a strong contract for geo workers will impact, all the grad student workers who are paying attention to this strike. I think that like, it's essentially it would be dishonest for us to not point to like the need to overthrow this rotten system. Like we can only win so much through each contract campaign. And I think we know that like the broader social struggles on trans rights, on, Black rights, on women's rights are totally tied up in the labor movement and like the world we live in, climate. But like, yeah, it's been just a total pleasure to talk to both of you. Really exciting, and yeah, just so much solidarity. And we're gonna try to turn this around as quickly as we can so we can bring as much attention as you guys are going into these sort of crucial next 2 weeks. I don't know if there's, we've been kind of asking questions. Is there anything that we haven't asked that you want to make sure that people know about your strike or the fight you guys are conducting?
Yeah, sure. I have one thing that I'd add, and this is kind of pinned on to your last question, which is that the leadership and I think the broader union share this feeling that, the public university has been kind of hollowed out over the past 5 decades. And, this is really a neoliberal institution where the people at the top are not concerned about the quality of education. They're not concerned about research. They're concerned about growing the endowment and reaping big salaries for themselves, making sure that there are fewer tenure track faculty, more adjuncts, making sure that graduate workers are doing all this extra work, but only getting paid for a tiny fraction of it, and not having the university as a force for good in the community. The University of Michigan in Ann Arbor has very directly caused the gentrification, not only of Ann Arbor, but of the entire county, where graduate workers and other, mid-salary, not even that, can't afford to live in Ann Arbor. So we're moving, I live in the neighboring community, Ypsilanti, and this place is getting less affordable because we're forced to live here now too. And these connections are very clear. The biggest landlord in Ann Arbor is a regent of the University of Michigan. So you can't make this up, right? So, and not to mention, one of the things we're talking about is this community-based police alternative. That's one of our big proposals. And we saw was this last week, 2 weeks ago, that, the campus cops were far from campus trying to arrest some of our members who were picketing outside the president's car. So it's these kind of things where trying to have the university be a force for good, where they actually value education and not just checking a box with a grade. I mean, that's what's happening right now. The university doesn't care about the hundreds of hours of missed instruction. They only care about whether they're going to be able to get the grade in, keep the cogs turning. So I think that's kind of what we're also putting forward, a vision of the University of Michigan that's truly for the public, where anyone can come and thrive as a grad student, not just people who are independently wealthy.
I want to say too that something I've seen from like those voices in opposition of our strike is, you guys are graduate students. If you wanted to make money, go do something else. To which I say, I don't want to make money. I don't want to be like the richest person on the earth. I want to be here doing what I love to do. And that is my research towards my PhD. And this like service to these students, helping undergraduates learn what it is that I'm so passionate about. That's what I want to do. In order to do that, though, I need to make enough money to live here. I'm not asking that I am, a billionaire like some of those on the Regents Board of the University of Michigan. I'm really not asking for a lot. I don't think that I need a lot. But what the fight is for is to, let us be able to live. There's people saying, like you're students, like how important can your labor be? I mean, I think the answer to that will become clear in these immediate 2 weeks. There have been reports of department heads asking students to self-report their grade in the class because the grad student instructors aren't sharing it. I mean, this can only go on for so long before the entire reputation of the institution is ruined. Because what do you mean you just want me to tell you what grade I got? Obviously, I got 100% if it's coming from that. And so I think, you know, my major things from all this is like our labor is really, really valuable. We bring so much more to this institution than people realize. And our ask is not unreasonable. Our ask is not anything astronomical. It truly is, because the thing that so many of us want to do is just be here doing this, and we can't. So that is that's what's in it for me.